Okay, oh yeah, okay. And I do want to warn everybody before I say anything else, this is being recorded. And the question and answer part afterwards will also be recorded. So just so you know and you're not uncomfortable by it, we hope, though, that there's some interaction and you don't hold back because you're worried about your voice being recorded. My name is Pat Bloom. I'm part of the committee that put this whole series on this month. I'm part of the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry. And I'm here to welcome all of you, and especially to welcome a group of people who, it's harder to introduce people when you really love them because it's hard to know what to say. So I'm here to introduce Kurt Toftland, who will lead us in this whole session today and is the Shakespeare Behind Bars guy. He is going to introduce Kevin. He wants to introduce Kevin, and I think the last name is Papuga. I'm so sorry. Welcome for being, I'm glad you're here. And Kurt brought lots of friends. I'm so glad that his friends are with us and Hope Church people are with us and that Michelle is with us. Michelle is the costume designer for Shakespeare Behind Bars, and she's the head of Holland Rep now. And many of us know her for her absolutely wonderful mother, Leveda. So there are lots of people to welcome in this room. I worked hard on this intro, and I started thinking, well, I know they were reviewed by the New York Times at one point. Why not start with prestige? And then I thought, okay, this Hope Church. Maybe should I start with Bible verses? And I looked up all the Bible verses that had to do with prisons. And then we're at a place in Hope Church right now of what it means to be part of this congregation. That maybe what we really need to do is just to say, we're so proud of you, Kurt. You're one of us, we love you, and we're really glad you're with us. And maybe that's the message of the whole day. So thank you all for coming, and I'm going to turn it right over to Kurt.
Thank you. And welcome. Eric, I have who protect me. Welcome. I do two things really well, and you're going to see both of them. I sweat, and I cry, okay? So you're going to see both of those today. But anyway, I'm going to start with a 20-minute interview that I did that is soon to be released nationally because it just answers a lot of questions. We have dear friends in the audience who know what Shakespeare Behind Bars is. We probably have some people that don't know what it is. So this is a succinct, quick way to give you a leg up on the programming, and then I hope for deep conversation afterwards because we'll all be on the same page. So thank you. Yes. Yes. I'm a theater person, and theater people start on time and end on time. So I sweat and I also sweat when we have technical difficulties.
We also usually get dress rehearsals, and I'm filling in on the day. And
I'm not blaming you.
No, I get you.
There's no blame, Eric.
This is supposed to be appearing in the other place. Ken showed me that when I did this, it would appear there. Which it's not. Yeah, it feels annoying to him, though. Let's see here. Why is it not doing it? We're here. Yeah, maybe grab him, sorry. Yeah. I don't know why it's not doing it.
show?
Yeah, it's not doing it.
Let me see.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
I'm Kirk Toftland. I'm the founder of Shakespeare Behind Bars, and since 1995, I've been doing workshops in prisons, adult male and female, and juvenile, also co-gender facilities in Kentucky, Michigan, and Illinois. I also run Shakespeare Beyond Bars programs for military veterans and for returned citizens who were members of the SBB Circle while inside. And we also tour a one-person memoir show called Othello's Tribunal. Shakespeare Behind Bars is an arts program. It's a volunteer program that we bring into prisons free of charge. We raise our own money to provide the service. And it's where I use art, theater, the collective works of William Shakespeare, and original writing to get at what it means to be a human being. It was about vulnerability, and it was about the fact that hurt people, and unless you figure out how to intervene, it just is going to continue the cycle. And so prisons are notoriously high in recidivism rate. So my interest was, because the arts had changed me as a human being, my interest is, well, if they changed me, why am I special? Why can't I take this into the prison and see what happens with it? So we've been doing that for the last 28 years, and the national recidivism rate's about 67%. Our recidivism rate over 28 years is 6%. So 6 out of 100 of our guys have come back to prison, most of them for economic reasons because people wouldn't give them a job. And so they fell back into old patterns of behavior. And of the 6% that have come back, 90% are back on the street, none of them committing any violent crimes. Again, using art, theater, the collected works of Shakespeare and original writing, we offer programs that use those 4 areas, those 4 pillars, to work with about 20, 25 prisoners over an elongated period of time. It doesn't have a 6-week basis. Our program in Kentucky has been running for 28 years. Program in Michigan's been running for 12 years. And it's about helping them to understand the world that they came from and why they did the things they did. Prisons are filled with trauma victims, and that goes back to what I said earlier with hurt people will continue to hurt people. And so my interest is could we find a way for this intervention in dealing with the trauma to help them understand where the trauma came from? And children are born innocent and they're born good, but they're not always born into great situations. And so they simply become reflections of the world they're born into, just like everyone out there is a reflection of the world they were born into. Doesn't mean they don't change and evolve as they grow older, but with victims that come from racism and poverty and violence and all of the ills, the social ills that we have, their trauma runs very, very deep. So I use Shakespeare because oftentimes the trauma that they've experienced, they don't have words for it. There's no language for it. Shakespeare has language for it. And so through the aesthetic, we find a scene, we find a character that perhaps has had trauma that mirrors that individual's own trauma. And then without ever asking intrusive questions, because the circle is always about invitation and never demand, they begin to work on this character. To understand the character, they have to unpack the language. They have to understand what the character is saying. And what happens is when there's a biographical connection to the character, something that happens in the character's life that happens in that individual's life, that becomes a way of articulating their biography. What doesn't exist in them, they use their dramatic imagination. Slowly but surely what happens is by talking and analyzing a character, why they do the things, what's their motivation, what's the outcome of that, they begin to apply that to their own lives. And they begin to unpack their own life. And then through the circle of healing, which is a guilt-free and a shame-free zone, and they hear other individuals, other participants talking about their trauma in their own language. And it gives them the courage then to begin to articulate their trauma in their own language. And only when you can articulate your trauma in your own language does healing happen. Yeah, Hamlet. I use Hamlet almost at the beginning of every circle, because Hamlet says, to be or not to be. That is the question. And that's about choices. And then he goes on in that monologue to talk about the two choices. One is to kill himself. Another is to kill his uncle, who killed his father to become the king and then married Hamlet's mother. And he's in a moral and ethical dilemma. He's not killed anyone. He's trained as a soldier, but he's never been a soldier. And so what I'm trying to get forth in that monologue is, guys, because I hear this all the time, I didn't have a choice, Kurt. I had to kill that guy. It's like, no. You had many, many choices. No, let me tell you about that situation, which then draws them out. And they talk about that autobiographical event in their life. And then we begin to unpack, okay, you chose to kill Claudius, but you could have chosen not to do it. And that gets them into the framework, and the way of thinking is, oh, I always have a choice. And that becomes part of their vocabulary. So that when they're out on the yard and they encounter something, perhaps something that's could turn into a violent event, it clicks their cognitive on. And their cognitive goes, well, maybe this is a Hamlet moment. To be, well, yeah, I could stab that guy. But then what would happen? What are the consequences of that? I'd go to the hole. If I killed him, I'd get more years added to my sentence. And it's all about unpacking the consequences of your actions and understanding that good actions don't necessarily reap good actions, but for them, it becomes the right thing to do. So that's one simple example of how it changes. When you change thinking, you change behavior. And when behavior changes, then the role of the program is to help them manifest that change. And what we've seen, particularly with violence, another statistic that I use when I'm talking to wardens or deputy wardens or even correctional officers, the lowest of the low in the totem pole in prisons, we took, in Michigan, we took 25 to 35 violent events per month on the yard over a year and a half to below double digits. So what happens is people want to work in a safe place. Actually, people want to live. The prisoners want to live in a safe place. And so when you talk about that, that's how it manifests itself is in behavior, and they become peacemakers. And the reason for that is, interestingly enough, it's a voluntary program, and many of those who join the program are already leaders of all the prison gangs. They're leaders of each individual religious sect. And they're big individuals on the prison yard. They have a lot of power, a lot of respect. And for whatever reason, they get drawn into the program and they begin to examine themselves and realize that they can use their power. They can use their leadership not to make more harm, but to make less harm. And it is, again, this evolution into understanding who you were, who you are, but the most important question, who do you want to be? It is, as I think I said earlier, we work with, roughly 20 to 25 individuals, because that's as many as we were able to really accommodate, because it's a deep dive into each one individually. I'm not there to fix them. I sit in that circle to fix myself. I'm there to create space for them to fix themselves by giving them the tools that they need to be able to fix themselves. Because that's the only way healing happens. Any program that's trying to change behavior has to do with when the individual makes up their mind to change their behavior. So we gather in a circle. We're usually in a classroom. And the first thing that we do on the first day is we create our modus of operandi, which is each individual gets a card. And on that card, I ask them to write the value or virtue that they admire the most in the individual that they are closest to or love the most. Can be alive, can be past. They write that value. It might be truthfulness. And each one writes their value. And then we go around the circle and each person shares their value, why it's important to them, and how they're going to manifest it in the circle. And then the circle decides, yes, that's something that I can support. I can support truthfulness. And then it's put into the middle of the circle with its, on the card, face up. Once we go through that process, like if truthfulness is mentioned again, it just gets doubled, tripled. It means it's really important to 3 people in the circle. I print up the values and I give it to them, and it goes into the front of their journal. Because one of the things that we do is journal every day, and it's about them writing to themselves. Some of them that are artists, that are writers, that are poets, hip hop artists, that translates itself into art. But it's just really a dialogue with themselves. And then we start on introducing them to theater techniques, something the majority have never done, games, improvisations. Then we introduce them to Shakespeare and text. We unpack, I'll take the to be or not to be monologue that we'll read through it several times. We'll talk about the definition of words. We'll start to unpack those things. We have long discussions about it. And then they go and each one of them memorizes or works to memorize. Some of them have never memorized anything. And then we come back and they share that. They share things from their journal. And it just goes, step by step. I don't really go in with a forced agenda. Because the program is circular and because the program never ends until I pass away, become senile or am kicked out, which happens on occasion. The prison will boot me out because I'm offering too much humanity to inhuman people. And then eventually it gets into a shared performance. We share the performance for the year. We share the performance, which is my favorite performance, of where each of the individuals is permitted to invite a loved one or family member to come to the performance. After each performance, there's always a talk back between the audience and the performers. And then we start the process all over again, working on what our next production is going to be. Yeah, I think arts programming is a very viable programming. There's a lot of research that's been done on it. It's proven to be effective. But I don't think if you see, our program's voluntary. They get nothing for it. They get a T-shirt, they get a pizza party, and they get a bracelet that says Shakespeare Behind Bars on it, as a passage. And that's all they get. As far as external, they get no good time. But what they get is for themselves. They come to understand themselves. They come to begin to change. And then what we get is they're able to share with their family success. And perhaps they never had success in the eyes of their family. And their family, it just creates this really strong connection between loved ones on the outside and the person on the inside. And if they have if they have an end to their sentence or are paroled, what happens is it creates great relationships for them to return to home to, which we know in returned citizens, they need family support. They need loved ones. They need that in their life to help them assimilate themselves back in. There's an old story, an indigenous story about a young boy and his grandfather, who's the chief. And the chief says to the young boy, his grandson, he said, there are two wolves in the world. In essence, there's the wolf that's good, and then there's the wolf that's evil. And they're always fighting against each other. And the grandson says, well, which one wins, grandfather? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. So prisons are retributive, they're punishment. There is an understanding that there's supposed to be some, I call it habilitation. I don't like the word rehabilitation, because how do you rehabilitate a human soul? You can rehabilitate a damaged knee. So I call it habilitation. It's about what does it mean to be a human being. And so that process and that journey is what's at the core. And there are those that work in prisons, good people, beautiful people, wonderful people, and people that are there because they have no power in their life. They get to be in power, they get to inflict power. We're a guilt and shame driven society. And so they feel that shame and guilt is what changes behavior. Doesn't change it one iota. But they're there to make sure that those people get punished, which means they shouldn't have any rights. They shouldn't have good food. They shouldn't have good housing. They shouldn't have programs, particularly programs that are arts driven, because again, they're viewed as frivolous. But then I have these we've also changed the minds. I've seen COs that were the most retributive I've ever met. But over time, they watch the process. And the proof is always in the pudding, right? The proof is those men can leave that circle and go onto the yard and stop doing negative things. That changes a person's view of, oh, maybe this program does work and my life is safer, because nobody wants to be stabbed or beaten up on the yard. A prisoner doesn't and an officer doesn't, Officers want to go home to their families. Prisoners want to eventually get out and go home to their families. So it is about that sometimes that wolf of negativity is in power. And when the wolf of negativity is in power, programs are jettisoned. We just keep doing what we're doing. We keep expanding. COVID shut us down, locked us out of the prisons. I'm still locked out of the prison I work in Michigan because because COVID gave the excuse for those that are incarceration people the opportunity to keep volunteer programs out. They can't stop the mandatory program, but those programs are delivered by correctional staff. They're not outsiders coming in. And so when you an artist in a corner, they innovate. So that's when I created a virtual program called Shacks Beyond Bars for returned citizens. Because the thing I heard from guys coming home, men, women coming home was, Kurt, I really miss the circle. I miss that brotherhood. Just like a soldier can only talk about war really in depth with another soldier, a prisoner can only talk about the prison experience to another prisoner. They can't, their family will never understand it. They don't even have language for it, for the novices, the people that haven't had that experience. And so I started the program. We meet every Tuesday night, and it's national because they can be anywhere because it's virtual. And then I created one of the first virtual programs in a prison in eastern Kentucky in the southern part of Appalachia, high in the hills, very isolated. And every Thursday I meet with them in virtual. Not quite as effective. I wish I was there in person, but I live in Western Michigan. They're in Eastern Kentucky, so it allows us in real time to be with each other and connect with each other. Then one of our founders, Sammy Byron, who's one of the prisoners that they follow in the Philomath Films award-winning documentary, Shakespeare Behind Bars, he chose to play the role Othello. And his crime mirrors Othello's crime. Othello smothers his wife, Desdemona, because he's jealous and he thinks she's been unfaithful to him. Sammy strangled his ex-girlfriend because she was going to reveal to his wife and stepson their affair. and he feared losing them. And in a moment of losing his mind, strangled her. He chose to play the role. So that was, I don't cast them, they cast themselves. That was heroic and noble in my estimation, because how many people could really face in reality something horrible that they did? When he finished in 1999 with that role, the role wasn't done with him. So he and I began working on a version called Othello's Tribunal, a cutting where he plays Othello and Iago and Desdemona. And then it led into his starting to talk about his trauma. He was abused as a 6-year-old. A high school boy abused him, sexually abused him at school. And then when he was a middle school student, a neighbor boy abused him. So he had sexual abuse that the first time that it happened, he went home to tell his dad, because you want to tell your parents, right? His parents were both alcoholics and were both violent, both verbally and physically. And his father rejected him, called a 6-year-old a punk, said he didn't fight hard enough. So all of that stuff gets stuffed down, deeper and deeper. And that rage came forth in a destructive manner years later, and he killed someone. And so he talks about that and shares that and unpacks that. And that took years for him to be able to get to that level of truth, to get to that level of being able to take the hardest look at himself and his actions, but to understand where it came from. See, I'm not interested in what criminals have done. I'm interested in how the crime happened. Why? Why is always my question. And if I seek for understanding, if I go the other way and say, what is wrong with you, which is society? What is the matter with you? It only creates defense. But when I say, how did that happen? Can you tell me how that happened? It creates story. And story is where healing is. Well, that it's not frivolous, right? That art and theater's about real life in real time, and it's about being able to practice. I always say Shakespeare behind bars is a rehearsal for life. That's what it's about. People that are incarcerated many times have not come from, quote, what somebody else would say is a normal background. They've come from really violent backgrounds, and you can understand why they did what they did. And the question is, helping them understand what they did, then maybe it won't happen again. So that's what I'm after, is that art, theater, and Shakespeare. And I do Shakespeare because I love Shakespeare, but because most of the prisoners I have dealt with have never read Shakespeare. They've never done theater. They've had a really bad experience with Shakespeare. And the fact is that I call it Shakespeare, and I'm going to eliminate your Shakespeare because I'm going to teach you the techniques to unpack the language. And when you unpack the language, the stories are there. We're a nonprofit. The most important thing is we're a nonprofit. I've never taken a penny from the prison system, because the moment you take a penny from the prison system, it controls you or wants to control you. I'm a volunteer. So we're a nonprofit. So you can visit our website, shakespearebehindbars.org, O-R-G, and there's lots of information about the programming there and a place to donate if people choose to donate.
Thank you. So you know who I am. So I'll move to Kevin and have him introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, perfect. My name is Kevin Papuga. I was incarcerated in the MDOC for 70 months. I'm a self-proclaimed short timer. That's not to diminish the time that I did in prison, but it's just an objective acknowledgement that most of my brothers in Shakespeare Behind Bars did much more time than I did. After being released from prison, Now I am an undergraduate academic advisor at Wayne State University in the Mike Gillett School of Business, and I work on a grant called the Michigan Justice Fund, helping to reroute formerly incarcerated individuals through higher education as a means to complete parole successfully.
And the beauty amongst us two beasts is on the end, and I'll have, most of you know Michelle, but
She already introduced me.
I try not to speak for Michelle because I get my hand slapped. So Michelle, would you introduce yourself?
I've already been introduced. We can move on.
Okay. So we want to open this up to questions that you might have, and there, I think, is a roving mic that, so, because we're recording it, and we want to make sure that those that have any hearing challenges are able to hear your question. Thank you. Oh, I should also say, there are other brothers in the audience that are returned citizens. They may speak or may ask a question, but they're here to support us in the work, and I'm... Here's the cry moment. Oh, I love them. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if your guest would speak to his experience with Shakespeare Behind Bars.
Absolutely. I was actually first introduced to Shakespeare Behind Bars by my dear brother sitting in front of me, Donald Dowling, very early on in my time of incarceration at level 2, and that was at LRF. And that Shakespeare Behind Bars circle was very exclusive, and there was a long waiting list, and it seemed like there was no way that I was going to be able to get involved in that circle. As fate would have it, my time got waived. I was moved from the level 2 to the level 1 facility, and shortly after that, Kurt came over and started a circle at the level 1 facility, at Muskegon Transitional Facility. The first time I ever got to hear Kurt speak, he said something that resonated so deeply with me, I had to become involved. And he said, "Weak men know right and choose wrong to experience a sense of power that has always escaped them." I committed an armed robbery when I was 22 years old, and I was that weak man. I was that weak boy that knew what I was doing was wrong and chose to do it anyways, as an insane attempt to gain control of an out-of-control life. And like Hamlet, there were many other choices that I could have made. So I chose to identify with that quote by Kurt, and I started to work with Kurt. My experience in Shakespeare Behind Bars is the reason that I'm sitting in front of you here today. While I was able to go back to school while incarcerated and get an associate's degree from Jackson Community College that allowed me to go to Wayne State University, get a full ride, and be very successful there, the degree was a very small part of what I needed to move forward in life. And without Shakespeare Behind Bars, that degree wouldn't have meant much to me at all. Shakespeare Behind Bars allowed me to unpack deep traumas that I couldn't voice in and of myself. Unpacking Shakespeare's works unpacked the trauma within me and allowed me to look at it objectively. Going through that circle of restorative justice day in and day out with other men that wanted to participate and fix themselves was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. Moving beyond the men that were in the same situation as me or similar situations as me incarcerated, the volunteers that Kurt brought in and the love that Kurt brought in and the empathy and the humanity that was shown to us as prisoners, that was shown to me as a prisoner, was completely transformative. The Michigan program is a little different than the Kentucky program, especially the program that I was in at MTF. We never did a formal performance. We did monologues, and we did a lot of unpacking. And that was where a lot of power was held for me.
Thank you. I should also mention, too, that one of my co-facilitators here in Muskegon is in the audience, Edward Hartline, and happy to see him again. Haven't seen him since we got booted out. Another question. Here comes the mic.
Kurt, I'm interested in what called you or what beckoned you to even conceive of and then begin Shakespeare Behind Bars.
Art transformed me. We all come from a level of dysfunctionalism. Even though my parents are loving and wonderful, they had their own traumas in their own life. Thankfully, they found each other. But they passed their trauma on, unintentionally. And so when I discovered art, it gave me voice for emotions that I was never allowed to feel in the home. It was because they came from violent homes. And so the raising of a voice, the expression of a negative emotion just wasn't allowed because they didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know how to process it. They didn't know how to help their children. So, and they're also Scandinavian. I'm 93% Viking. So we're very stoic. I have a lot of stoicism in my background, and so the expression of emotions is, we always knew our parents loved us, but it wasn't something that was said every day, right? Well, then I discovered theater and playing a character that had to have emotions that I didn't possess. And so you want to play the character truthfully. And so what you do is you use your dramatic imagination to find what the truth is, and I was able to then begin to express emotions, and I healed myself. So years later, I was always drawn to those children in human beings in particular, but I started out with children, to those that were labeled. I was working in the schools as a teaching artist. I worked in summer camps with kids. And I was always drawn to the kid that was labeled, learning disabled, you know, behaviorally challenged, you know, and also with kids that had physical issues too. So, so what I did is I just made a decision that the quote normal kids didn't need me, but those kids did. And so I went to work with them and developed a specialty in that. And then what happened was adults came along when I read about a program that was started. I lived in Louisville 30 years, and I read about a sociologist at Bellarmine University that started a program in prison, adult prison, called Books Behind Bars, and it was a literature-based program. And so I called him up because I wanted to learn, because a lot of my kids ended up going to and I started working in detention centers, but then a lot of my kids went to prison, adult prison, didn't have a connection there. So I really met with him to find out, you know, I want to know more about this. And we talked about what he was doing. And I said, literature, huh, what about Shakespeare? He said, he got this look on his face. He's like, I don't know anything about Shakespeare. In fact, I'm not even sure I like Shakespeare, you know? And he said, why? And I said, well, when you read a book, you identify with the character, you're the protagonist, the antagonist, you get a chance to leave your world and go into another world. I was a reader, and I said, oh yeah, that's all true, that's all true. You can learn empathy and compassion through that process. I said, in theater, you have to inhabit the character. You have to be Macbeth, who is a good man that does a bad thing when he kills the king because he wants to be king. He makes a choice. And his face just dropped, and he said, be my partner. Join me and let's do Shakespeare. And so in the spring of the year, which is April 23rd is Shakespeare's birthday, we read a Shakespeare play. And he was working with a group of middle school students at a very, very tough middle school in Louisville. High degree of dropout, high degree of gangs, I mean, really tough. And he found 2 enlightened English teachers there, and then his wife was a psychologist at the prison. So she found a dozen prisoners that could be cleared to be able to meet with children, and then they both read the book and they came together and they talked. So when I did the Shakespeare, they read the Shakespeare, they picked a scene, they produced the scene, the prisoners did the same thing, they came and they performed for each other, then the Romeo 8th grader sat down with the Romeo prisoner, had a conversation about Romeo, you know, and so that's how it was born. So I didn't go knocking on the door and say, let me in. I did that with juvie facilities and stuff, but and then it's just grown from there. That was in the early 90s. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. David's got a question.
I want to pick up on what you just said about inhabiting a character, and I want to do it in the form of a question to Michelle. I'm in a small online book group with a half dozen others, and this week a philosopher who's in Pennsylvania talked about being invited to a Halloween party where you had to come as a character and then act out that character. And he went as St. Augustine. And he found after talking St. Augustine, he came away with a deeper understanding of St. Augustine than he ever had just from teaching about St. Augustine. And so now when he teaches about Descartes, he goes to class as Descartes. And so you're a theater professor and you've directed plays. Are your actors affected by the roles they play? Do the characters they inhabit leave some fingerprints in their own identity or understandings? And the other two of you can relate this to Shakespeare behind bars.
And in fact, our entire industry is being more cognizant issue for actors, because sometimes it's very traumatic because you're portraying someone that might have something that's pretty close to you. So we've been doing a lot of training in our department, and it's throughout the industry on mental health work for actors. We do something called getting into the role and getting out of the role so that we can safely leave it there and know that this is a play that we're doing. We're touching deep emotions, but we're going to leave it there. And just because we're playing two characters that hate each other in the play, we're going to leave it there. And it doesn't mean that we hate each other in life or love each other in life. I mean, it works the other way too. So that's a huge, wonderful addition that we're taking better care, I think, now in our industry of the folks that are doing this work. And I'll just share, maybe, this is the layperson coming in. When I jokingly often say that, I fell in love with what Kurt does before I fell in love with him, which isn't totally true, but
Worked pretty well for me.
But the essence is there. And the first time Kurt invited me to teach a class, the first time I went into a prison, and I probably had what maybe some of you similarly think. It's like, oh yeah, prison. Like, I don't think about that. That's where the bad people are. Good, they're there, I'm here, and we're not going to think about it anymore. But the minute I walked in the door and I sat down, they're students, just like my students. They wanted to have knowledge that I had to give to them. And you recognize that, yes, these people might have done horrible things, but they have humanity inside them still. They have something to give still. And they're not just there to be flushed away. And so that's began the deep work. And I was much more involved in the program in Kentucky because I would go every summer. And so we would spend the month of May almost entirely in the prison with the men, and then quite a bit through the summer. Don't get to see the men in Michigan as much, but it's changed my life. It's changed my students' life. I've had multiple classes that I've brought into the prison, and at least 3 students that have interned with Kurt and have gone on to do work similar to this.
I want to also, because I'm cognizant of the time, so if any of the other returned citizens would like to say anything about their experience, I want to offer that to them too, so they're not excluded but welcomed into the, another question.
I have a question for the returned citizens. As someone who has peripheral work with returned citizens, the bias that you face every single day, I wonder how this program maybe has helped you face some of that, and if it has. Do you understand what I'm asking?
So why don't we kick it to anybody in the audience that wants to speak, and then Kevin can add his point if he would like to. Somebody like to say anything? It's totally up to you. Larry? Give it to Larry. He'll talk. He'll talk about anything.
Yeah, pretty much. I like the sound of my own voice. So yeah, to speak to that. So I've been out, oh my God, what is this, 2024?
Yeah.
So 14, almost 14 years. Thank you. Recently I faced that what you're asking. I just recently faced that. So my employer knew my background, but we're a corporation. And I had terminated an employee. I'm in charge of the brokerage. So in retribution, she went to corporate and told them about my background, which they had no idea about, in an attempt to get me fired. And I can say the things that I learned in Shakespeare Behind Bars came in very handy, right? Because it's all about choices, right? I didn't want to be retributive. I could have went and told her employer that she was fired for embezzlement and other things of that nature. But instead, I made the choice to be bigger and trust in the relationships that I had built with my boss, with the agents in my market center. And I got that from this program. I had the social skills of I don't even want to discuss that, but previous to this, but Shakespeare Behind Bars has changed my life, and it's given me those skills, I think answering your question appropriately here, to deal with those things that come my way, the hard stuff. So, and I wouldn't be out. I wouldn't be, and so unlike most Michigan inmate, I'm a Kentucky program. I'm an interstate transfer here. I am still on parole 14 years later. So, much to the annoyance of my parole officer. So, but yeah, so the decisions, the choices, the skills I learned to regulate my emotions in Shakespeare Behind Bars have been invaluable to me being out. So, hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Bruce, and I left prison 3 years ago. So I'm fairly one of the newer ones. And I did play King Claudius. I was the bad man. But to answer your question, I have a daughter, a son-in-law that will not have anything to do with me because of the crimes I've committed. My very best friend Susan's, half of her family won't have anything to do with me because of what I did. And I have to still, I'm a Christian, so I still have to show the love of Christ through me, no matter what somebody else does. And Shakespeare helped me so much to identify and put it all together, to change from the person I was when I committed my crimes to who I am today and who I want to be tomorrow. And I know who I want to be tomorrow, so I use that. And God has opened up doors to where in the last year, I've been one of the supervisors at the rescue mission, at the Holland mission, so right around the corner. So I get to shock people once in a while. They'll look at me and they'll say, you must have a great life, and now you were retired and now you're back working and you're serving. What brought you to this? And I would explain certain pieces. And then there's other people that say, you could never understand my life. Because they just got out of prison. You could never, and I said, my number is 860-419. I spent 8 years in blah, blah, blah. And their mouths would fall right open. But it gave us a connection where then I could help them with their humanity and become the person that they need to be so they could be successful and not go back to prison.
Another questions? I know some of you have to leave to get ready for the next portion of the services, so please feel free if you have to leave to go. Right over there, Nate, right here, up front.
Why Shakespeare? I'm sure there's a lot of other playwrights you admire and playwrights that use language that's more accessible and more familiar to your actors. So why choose Shakespeare?
Great question, and I'm asked it all the time, and you are right, there are other playwrights that I could use, but I am a Shakespeareaholic, and so I have a great deal of passion for Shakespeare. I ran a free Shakespeare festival in Louisville, Kentucky for 20 years, and I've acted in many plays and directed many plays, and I can't get enough of them. And the other fact is that he wrote 1,223 characters. And there is not a human being on the face of the earth that I can't find more than one character in Shakespeare that can mirror their biography and also take them into their dramatic imagination and help to heal their whatever it is that their trauma is, right? And so he's a great storyteller, and he is a challenge. And the challenge is that, particularly with human beings, as you hear me in the tape, I call it Shakespeare, because people say, how did you prepare yourself to go and teach Shakespeare to prisoners? And I say, I taught Shakespeare to middle school students, public middle school students. The toughest audience on the face of the earth, next to, I also work in juvenile detention. I have a juvenile program in Chicago that I run, facilitate and produce, and we meet in September through November. And those are 15-year-old boys that are, my middle school group, right? But they're sentenced to detention. And I had two 15-year-old boys this year. When they finish and turn of age, they will go to adult prison for 40 years. They've been sentenced for 40 years. That's the toughest audience, but I cut my teeth by teaching middle school students. And if you can teach middle school students and get them impassioned about anything, you can teach anybody on the face of the earth. So I had no fear. I had absolutely no fear to go in and work with adults. I still have trepidations and fears when I go in and work with my detention youth, but it's about solving that problem. And so, Shakespeare, again, is such a great storyteller, and he never inserts himself. You will never know what his political, his religious, he just tells the story, and he makes human beings of his characters to be what it is that they're going to be. And so, again, it's my addiction to it. And then the fact that when you break down the tools and give them the tools to understand Shakespeare, what I witness time and time again is individuals that have been told that they're worthless and they're stupid and they will never amount to anything. It awakens the life of the mind. And in awakening the life of the mind creates hope, and hope creates dreams. And the reality is you don't have to be remembered for the worst thing that you ever did. You have to take responsibility for it. You cannot make excuses for it. You cannot say it because my father beat me that I did this. It's like, no, your father beat you, so let's understand that, but let's also understand your father. And why do you think your father was violent? Because he grew up in violence. So when do you want to break the cycle? Right? So it's all about those kinds of things. And you can find really good people in Shakespeare that do bad things. You can find really bad people in Shakespeare that end up doing good things. So what happens is when you inhabit that, you begin to understand yourself. I never talk about any psychology or any of that other stuff. I just let it happen organically. Because I'm not there to fix them. I'm there to create space and to offer non-judgment and love. And I think the Beatles were right. All you need is love. There is not a human being on the face of the earth that doesn't want love and need love. There is also not a human being on the face of the earth that hates the father that beat them and their mother that doesn't want their father to love them. That's what it's about, community. So Shakespeare does that.
I think the other part of Shakespeare is that, as Kurt said, it awakens the intellect, and that also gives confidence. And so I love, one of our guys in Kentucky would say, after kind of this process, he would say, I was always uncomfortable talking to someone who had a higher education background than I had. Or he said, now I feel like I can talk to anybody. And that language, you'll see in the documentary, my favorite scene in the documentary is when Big G is folding laundry, reciting Shakespeare as he's folding the laundry. It's like having those words in your mouth elevates you.
So we're running out of time, and I want to be cognizant of time. I also want to, before probably our last question, I want to say thank you, because Hope Church supports Shakespeare Behind Bars, and I have lovely people that are sitting in this audience that make donations every year to support Shakespeare, and so I'm deeply blessed, and I don't want to call them out, but I'm going to call them out because they're our largest funder, and that's David and Carol Myers. and as you hear me say, you know, we don't take a penny from government. And so everything that we do is reliant. We're a nonprofit. And so, you know, if you have an interest in becoming involved in that, just go to our website or reach out to me. Be happy to take your money. And we'll use it well.
So,
Jane.
Kurt, Shakespeare, you answered one of the things I thought, because it would be like taking the calculus class and now you think, I can actually do this. But taking the Shakespeare, oh my God, I can really do this, you know. I think that's a big part of it. The other thing I'm thinking is that I'm wondering whether it takes a Kurt, whether it takes that kind of man to lead you to be able to cry too, to be able to lead you to feel the emotions. In other words, could a cold-hearted person teach Shakespeare not shed a tear and have the same impact?
I think a cold-hearted person can do just about anything. Right?
You answer that. Yeah.
I am absolutely agreeing with you. I think that Kurt's empathy is what made me open up to the circle. And I think the empathy from the other men that were already drawn to the circle is what also allowed the safe space. Prison is a hyper-toxic masculine environment. And to shelter your emotions is to protect yourself from everyone around you. So providing the space to feel those emotions and to express those emotions allowed me to dive into a little bit of emotional intelligence, right? And to start to unpack these emotions that had already been bottled up for the first 23 years of my life. So I can't imagine trying to unpack emotions with somebody that was cold-hearted and with somebody that wasn't feeling and allowing the opportunity for those emotions to come forth.
So thank you, and thank you to Kevin for driving over. And what?
One more question.
Oh, okay.
We still have 3 minutes.
Well, I have a wrap up.
Man.
And Jane's my boss.
Kurt, first I want to thank you for one of the best sermons I've ever heard. A few paragraphs ago, all you need is love. And secondly, thinking about the parallels to the average person walking the earth, to what you're describing among these folks that you've worked with. I spent 15 years of my professional life working in drug and alcohol rehab, and it reminds me very much of the same process. It's almost always grounded in trauma and emotional numbness. And it might begin with a choice, but soon a person is swept into a tidal wave over which they have no control. Do you see that? And is it a fair parallel to those of us who struggle with addiction?
Yeah, I see all the parallels. I also will tell you that the prison world is much more diverse than the public thinks it is. I've worked with PhDs incarcerated, and I've worked with illiterates that are incarcerated, and everybody in between, and every race, color, creed, experience, right? So what we look for is not our differences. What we look for is our commonality. And commonality is, the bottom root is love. And from love can come everything else. But addiction is, and I work in prisons with a lot of people that are incarcerated because of addiction, because they did something when they were addicted. So you have to get to the root of the addiction. And the root of the addiction is numbing. It's like they just don't have language for what it is that happened to them, and they think they're worthless, and they've borne witness to perhaps familial or friends that are numbing themselves. And so it is stripping away. I never really deal with trying to say, stop your addiction, right? It's like, well, tell me what happened. Can we get to the root of your story? And can we find out what happened? And they unpack, and when they unpack, the addiction literally goes away. The addiction stops. But addiction is not just drugs and alcohol. Addiction is sex, it's making money, it's addiction is very far and wide ranging. Society tends to think of it as very narrow, but it isn't. Addiction is anything that you're doing or using to numb your emotions because you don't know how to express them in a positive way. And not everyone who is addicted commits a crime. right? So, you know, I go to the place where harm was passed on. And my concern is to make the prison, as you hear me, a safer place for everybody and for men to be prepared to come home. And I work with guys that have life sentences, and I get up every day, just like I get up every day that I see Romeo and Juliet, the play, which I've directed many times and played characters in. But I still, when I sit in that audience, I believe Romeo and Juliet are going to get away. They're going to live. They're going to live. I wait for the day for that to happen. So the same thing is true. Thank you for coming. Please, if you've enjoyed this, and we'll do one more with Donald, I'll let. And thank Pat and her committee for bringing us to you. And also, if you have an interest, if you as those that show up, right? I figure there's a built-in audience because you made a choice to be here. Thank you for making the choice to be here. Sammy would be very interested in coming up and sharing his one-man show. It's a 60-minute show, and he does a Q&A afterwards. It's called Othello's Tribunal. So if that's something, I put that to Pat and the leadership. If you're interested in that, we would be willing to do.
Share G's story.
Pardon? Oh, Big G, who you meet in the documentary, is 37 years, been in prison. Michelle and I leave from here to go directly down to Kentucky because at 1 p.m. on Monday, he's released from prison. So, Donald.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Greatly appreciate it. Jimmy. Oh, sorry. I would be completely remiss if I didn't say anything. Who were those donors you were speaking of? Are they here?
Pardon?
The donors?
Yeah, David right there.
Thank you so much.
And this church is
And
a
this
donor,
church
so that everyone
and
here
other
is a
members in this audience are.
Thank you. Thank everyone. I would be completely remiss if I did not get up here and say anything. I did 15 and a half years. I come from that damaged family just like Kirk did. Grew up in a gang, drug dealing, what you can name it, I did it. And the mystic poet Rumi, one of the favorite quotes is, "What you are seeking is seeking you." And Shakespeare Behind Bars came into Muskegon Prison at a time in my life that I was making a change. I was making a decision to be somebody different. And Shakespeare Behind Bars, Kirk gave the best definition of love I've ever heard. Love is when you create the space for someone to be who they are. And that's what Kurt has always done from day one. And Shakespeare Behind Bars is the best program I've ever been a part of in my entire life. It helped me more than anything else in life. And you get a group of men together who are from different walks of life. And when they memorize a monologue, they share their perception. And the best type of knowledge is to learn from other people's experiences, to learn through their eyes. And that's what you get. So I don't have to make that mistake, or it helps me look out a different window, which shifts my mindset, which helps me grow and evolve. Shakespeare, the characters. Thermodynamics says energy cannot be destroyed nor created. So the same things that those characters were going through 500, 600, 700 years ago, we still go through today. So I can take that character and apply it to my life. I can take The Merchant of Venice and A Pound of Flesh, The Revenge, and I can tell my truth through that monologue. So, and this man does the same thing. So I see through his eyes, I understand what he went through, and it just opens my entire world. Talk about what you brought up, the question. I concern myself with my family's, my wife. My wife is from the other side of the tracks, and her employer. That's the only thing I concern myself with, because the criminal is nothing more than a mentality. It's a way you think. And I eradicated those thinking patterns a long time ago, so I'm not concerned with how somebody views me. We judge. Everybody judge. It's a split-second thing that we do. It saves time for us. It's going to happen. But going through the program with this man right here and what he has done for me and how he has nurtured me and loved me. And this, man, I wish I could get on a mountaintop and scream Shakespeare behind bars. And that's the only reason I stood up, because it's being recorded. And whoever sees this in the future, I want them to understand this is the best thing going for us inmates. The very best. The word educate is eradicated from the Spanish word educo, and it means to extract. It means to withdraw. So when you read a book, nothing leaves the pages. It's unlocking what's already inside of us. So Kurt educated me on life, on love. So thank you all. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, everybody.
Indeed. Thank you, Kurt, Kevin, and Michelle, and our guests. Thank you very much. I just got back late last night from a conference where our theme song was going to put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. And we sang that again and again. We're going to put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. And thank you, Kurt, Kevin, and Michelle, and all of our guests and all of you for leading with love. Now, I need to tell you that next week, I don't know how many of you received Christian Century and saw the latest issue where the editorial was Artificial Intelligence Needs Theology. And he asks, what exactly is an evil robot? And who gets to define it? And he ends by saying, it's not that theologically minded people know more than others. It's that they know differently. And if we're headed for a robot apocalypse, people who know differently should be among the first to see it coming and respond. So starting next week, we're going to have a 3-session series on AI with Tom Ludwig. So I invite you to come and perhaps think differently. Thank you.
So before you all go, I want to thank Bruce and Ken and Eric for providing our technical, because we couldn't do it without them, so thank you. All right, you are excused.
Yep, you need to go to worship.